Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is directed by Zack Snyder, written by Chris Terrio and David S. Goyer, and stars Henry Cavill, Ben Affleck, Amy Adams, Jesse Eisenberg, Jeremy Irons, Holly Hunter, and Gal Gadot. And in Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, Superman finds himself under public scrutiny when some bad events are pinned on him. Meanwhile, Bruce Wayne, played by Ben Affleck, obsessively prepares to mount a preemptive attack on the Man of Steel. Now take note that this will be a review of the theatrical release of BVS, not the Ultimate Edition. I know what happens in the Ultimate Edition, I know the issues it addresses, but that does not change my opinion on the theatrical release, which my opinion of it hasn't really changed since I saw it back in March. It's still an extremely messy movie with really annoyingly self-important direction, but it is constantly redeemed by the presence of Batman. And let's just say it straight, the biggest issue with BVS is the fact that it tries to do way too many things and it obviously can't handle them. Let's look at the title of the movie first and let's go by section. First, let's talk about Batman. All the Batman stuff in this movie is really, really cool. In fact, it feels like they were a lot more invested in making a Batman film than anything else, because the story of Batman really just has so much conflict in it, and so it lends itself well to the cinematic medium. And Batman's really the only character in this movie with a real arc. At the beginning of the movie, you get to see the events of Man of Steel from Bruce Wayne's point of view, and that really sets up his character really well. So even when he's not fighting, like, you're still invested in him, even when he's talking to Alfred, because they have like this really cool dynamic. But then we move to the Superman part of the title, and this movie totally fails at being a sequel to Man of Steel. There is zero character development for Superman or Lois Lane or Martha Kent. All the Daily Planet stuff is really stupid and kind of useless. Lois Lane's own adventure to find out where this bullet came from doesn't really amount to anything in the end. You don't buy the relationship between Lois Lane and Clark Kent. And something supposedly really emotional happens at the end of this movie that has to do with Superman, but you don't feel for it at all. They don't earn that moment. And then the Dawn of Justice part in the title, all the Justice League stuff in this movie is so violently shoehorned into the movie. They really did not need to make this movie a setup for Justice League. It just wasn't necessary. Then you've got the character of Lex Luthor, who is really the person who pushes the plot forward, but his big plan is way too convoluted for its own good, and he's not really a very threatening or interesting character. He's just really weird. And you'll know just from watching the theatrical release that editor David Brenner really had to cut so much out of this movie because the cuts are so awkward and so jarring and so abrupt. This movie jumps from place to place without any sense of rhythm. There's no sense of timing or time progression. When they try to shoehorn in the Justice League stuff, the movie just screeches to a halt. And there are just way too many cuts to black, way too many flashbacks that are totally unnecessary and mess up the pacing. And as a result, watching this movie feels really exhausting, you know, because it's really long, but it feels really long. And I will pin a lot of this on Zack Snyder because he tries to give this movie this really serious tone, but he doesn't earn that because he doesn't really give us any characters or stakes apart from Batman that are worth caring about. There are attempts at humor in this movie, but they feel really misplaced. And all the Lex Luthor stuff, I'm not sure if it was supposed to be funny, but it's not funny, it's just really bizarre. And while Zack Snyder's strength is in action, a lot of the action in this movie actually really isn't that interesting. You know, there's this big fight that happens at the end, which is a complete mess. It looks terrible. However, anything that has to do with Batman actively fighting is still really, really cool. The way they made Batman fight in this movie was really different from how he fought in the previous Batman movies. And speaking of Batman, Ben Affleck in this movie is probably the best thing about this entire film. He really brings this realistic sort of weariness to Batman that really sets him apart from other portrayals in the past. Jeremy Irons is great as well as Alfred because he has this snarkiness about him that we've never really seen in any other version of Alfred. But you know, Amy Adams, Holly Hunter, Diane Lane, they have nothing to work with. Lawrence Fishburne is weird now, like he's a completely different character than he was in Man of Steel. Gal Gadot is cool as Wonder Woman, but she's so squandered. There should have been more of her. And I'm really disappointed in Henry Cavill in this movie because he just didn't have that humanity to him that he had in Man of Steel. He didn't have that sense of wonder anymore. And when it comes to Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor, I actually think objectively speaking he was good in his performance. It's just that the character is so erratically written that I don't think Jesse Eisenberg really was playing just one character, you know, and I wouldn't blame him for that. And overall, this movie does look good. Larry Fong's cinematography really does shine when he has interesting things to shoot, but most of this movie is just really muddy colors and really bland production design. I mean, all the Batman tech is cool at first, but after a while you realize that it's pretty bare and it's kind of dull. In the end, I really do think that Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is an aggressively mediocre film. It's definitely worth watching if you're a big fan of Batman, although you might not agree with some of his moral choices in this movie, but everything else is just really hard to recommend in my opinion. This is a really shaky foundation for the DCEU. So anyway, those were my thoughts on Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. I'm going to be seeing Suicide Squad later and we'll see how that goes. But if you guys have seen BVS, what do you think about it? Whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.